Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Let's start off with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A couple of announcements. The board completed its second retreat of the summer. Topics that we discussed on the retreat: communications, how we can get better at working with the community and listening to the community, and also we reaffirmed that these public forums that we hold, we had two last year, one on mental health in October, the other was on school safety in April. Definitely a lot of consensus that this is a good way forward to continue bringing pertinent topics to the attention of the community, to share our perspective, to clear up informational items as well. So that's something we will intend to continue. And we also got to meet our SROs. I did see them here earlier, our school resource officers, so it was a good opportunity to understand their perspective and how that will work this year. So that's the only other announcement on my part. Can I have a motion to adopt an agenda? Naomi first, just a second. Any comments or questions? If not, all in favor? So this is a study session designed for the purpose of bringing forward administrative updates to the board. There are no public comments. Residents may attend the next scheduled meeting, which is on September 11, 2018, and or contact the board by email at boe@shenet.org with any comments or questions. All questions come into the Office of Public Information Officer and are shared with the board and or superintendent as appropriate. Policy questions, concerns are typically addressed by the board president. Operational questions, concerns are typically addressed by the superintendent and or designated. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Robinson for superintendent comments.
Sure, just some dates, reminder dates. On Tuesday the 4th, we'll have Superintendent's Conference Day. The first one of two different sessions. One focus on instructional staff will arrive at 7:45, promptly kicking off at 8. Then I'll transition, that's in high school East Auditorium. Then I'll be transitioning to the high school West Auditorium, where at about 9 o'clock we'll be kicking off Superintendent's Conference Day for our support staff. So last year we did it for the first time and it was quite successful, and so we're looking forward to this year as well. So if you're available to both sessions, we'll end one and head over to the other, and by 10 o'clock or so you can commence with your work life or otherwise.
Just bring your running shoes.
Bring your running shoes. And related to running shoes, on the 5th, the first day of school, something that we have done now for a decade here at Shen since I've been here, is tour all the schools on opening day. We'll all meet at High School East at around 7:30, and I shared with you in Friday bulletin a schedule of what we're going to do, recognizing that some board members may not be able to be at the start, but you can always try to catch up throughout the day. And if you're available, it's a great opportunity not only to see what's happening within the buildings, but also for students and staff to see you as a board member. So it's a tremendous opportunity for you. But it's a long day. We start at 7:30, and we're anticipating being back here in middle school and being done around midday, around noon. So, and that's where you definitely have to wear comfortable shoes, because it's a lot of walking once we get into the building. So great opportunity for us to do that as well. And then on, that's also the first day of our students. We're pretty excited having students back in the building as well. So those are the main things that's coming up that I think is important for you as a board to be aware of, and certainly as a community to be aware of. This week, there'll be various open houses, starting where teachers and parents could come, and so people kind of gearing up for that. So the hustle and bustle is back on campus along with athletics. You start having people visiting buildings and opportunities for students to come into their respective schools as well. Do you want me to continue with the?
Sure.
Related to the school piece, this summer we had a lot of construction by design taking place because we were essentially trying to jam in what would have been 2 summers worth of work into one summer to kind of keep pace with the many things that we have planned for construction. And so we'll do a brief update, and joining us tonight is the primary architect, Callie Gasper from Mosaic, and also our project manager, the Freeman team. I'm not sure who's going to be in the Freeman team come up, just to kind of walk us through, just to give an overview of of kind of where we are right now, some of the things that has happened, some of the things that we hope to happen within the next 4 days. Actually, I guess more than that, since we'll be working probably right up to the wire on the 4th. And then some of the future projects that we have in SED that we'll be addressing in the coming year and beyond. So Augie and Callie, who's going to be first?
Projects under construction.
Yeah, we might as well start with things that are under construction. We'll start with the easy ones. Everything that was inside, indoors, underneath roofs, complete, ready to go. Punch list, carbon monoxide detectors, the window film work, CAB's office, AA's office, nurse's office, guidance here, coach's office in the green gym area, all complete, have been actually for a week or so. The press box, the stadium lighting, the new sound system that's going to be there, and the rest of the lighting systems are anticipated actually to be done by Thursday of this week. We're a little ahead of when I typed this last week. So the things that were not weather related, where we need to be. Things that were weather related, you've been around this summer, you know. Believe it or not, we actually lost more time for heat than we did for rain. I know that doesn't technically make a lot of sense, but there's a point where you just can't work. And 100 plus on a roof means the roof is about 160, 170. By 2 o'clock, you're spent. Playgrounds are plugging away pretty well. I think the last piece will be Arenda. Well, I know it will be because the final pieces that were ordered after the fact are being delivered on Thursday. Contractors coming down from Vermont on the 6th to install them. But all of the other ones, with the weather cooperates the rest of the week, should be ready to go. They were supposed to stripe the old Octave parking lot with a new traffic pattern tonight. They no-showed, about par for the course for these kind of things. They get too much work in too many places, and they show up for a little while, they do a little bit, and they disappear. The roof at East, which is our biggest project, about 70,000 square feet of roof. We have about 16,000 feet left to do. Expect to be done with that on Friday. The upstairs renovations are a function of the roof. So unfortunately, our folks and some of the contractor people will probably be here this weekend, ceilings, putting things back together, making it suitable for students and staff on Tuesday. So that's where we're at. Like Dr. Robinson said, we bit off a huge chunk by trying to do 17 and 18 in one summer. But I would say if I was grading it, I'd give us a 90%. Some of it was done way early, like this roof on this building was done before school even let out.
The lighting in the stadium is amazing.
It is, I mean,
It is.
you look at all the work that we did, and,
Yeah.
it's like the painter that comes in, all of the work that went on, thousands and thousands of hours, and then somebody comes in and turns on those lights, and yeah, you're wonderful. But, they really are,
They do look great.
that's a lifetime improvement. Nobody in this room will be around when they need to be replaced.
Wow.
Retired or moved on to whatever. We're finishing up the smaller.
We'll be in this room.
I don't see anybody younger.
We'll be around, but we may not be in this
It
room.
will be around. It won't be expired.
You'll be moved on to doing other things, because unless you're like 6, you won't be around when they wear out. The little lights, the shorter light poles, they put them all up today except for 2. The 2 closest to the concession stand actually had a plastic cap on the top instead of metal. So we couldn't mount the new lights on the old poles. Fortunately, I had a lot of pull with a certain manufacturer, my son, and said, I need these by tomorrow. Make me caps out of steel. So he's going to deliver them tomorrow.
Great.
Then they put the last ones up. The new speakers are already up. I don't know if everybody noticed them. They're up. Ronco, who is the district's sound people, are also doing that for us. They're bringing the rest of the equipment in on Thursday, do a sound check on Thursday, so fingers crossed we won't need to do the rental. We only did the rental and just saw PO was cut, and you wouldn't want to scramble around Thursday afternoon and try to find somebody for Friday of Labor Day weekend and hope that you have speakers, because Chris Cullen was prepared to do it with a bullhorn, but
No.
nobody wants that.
Thank you.
So that's where we're at.
Thank you so much. For the projects that are in design, I don't have a very exciting update, but we have a bunch of them going to SED this month. I see a big stack of paperwork there in that folder to be signed today. We have the remainder of the 2016 projects. There's a bunch of miscellaneous work as well as the campus-wide exterior signage. We held off on that till the end so that we could pair it with the traffic study work, which is part of the phase 1 of the 2017 projects. So that's 1610.4, we call it phase 4 of the 2016, and 1735.1, phase 1 of the 2017 projects. Those will be going in together. The phase 1 of the 2017 projects has the traffic study work are the big things, as well as we'll do as much demolition and asbestos abatement as we can for the science and technology wings in preparation for actually doing the reconstruction of those spaces the following summer. So that's the phase 1. The phase 2 would be the reconstruction of those spaces. So once school gets back into session, we've been focusing on the construction that's going on right now, as well as getting these phase 1 drawings together so we can get those into SED. So we'll kind of pick back up with that phase 2 with conceptual drawings. We'll start meeting with folks again with some concepts, meeting with faculty, seeing what they need for their programming, and hop back into that. And lastly, the phase 3 of the 2017 work is going into SED now. That is the Smart Schools project, and although it's phase 3 going in before phase 2, the Smart Schools projects often sit at SED longer than the other types of projects. So we want to make sure to get that in as soon as possible. So hopefully, after school starts, when we get back into this phase 2, I'll have some more exciting things to show you on the screen, but for now, that's...
Kind of 2 seconds on the library.
Yeah.
Can you mention, just talk about the library, some of the stuff that's happening right now?
Yeah, sure. We have the window wall is taken out in preparation for building our new small addition and the sloped glazing there. That'll bring the daylight in for us. They also have poured, if you recall, when in one of the entrances we did a ramp for accessibility, and on that ramp at the landing, the mid-landing point, we created kind of a raised classroom area there. So they have that all poured, so that's pretty exciting. Augie, do you want to talk about any of the maybe not as exciting
I mean,
things?
it's not pretty and it's not clean. It's pretty well.
It's a work site.
It's a very active construction site. There are no walls left that we don't need to hold up the second floor. There's a giant hole that you can look into from the cafeteria, full width. We're in the process of doing some excavation out there. I'm hoping the weather cooperates to get some footings in there before the kids come back. It'll be an interesting experience to have them watching from the cafeteria until we get it closed back in again later in the fall. It's going to be watch everything and see everything. A lot of the plumbing, electrical work, I mean, there's been miscellaneous power shutdowns through the summer because we've got to refeed a lot of things. You would think with all the LEDs and modern equipment, we'd be less power hungry, but we're actually more. We're actually using more power than we ever did and redistributing it around the building so that we can use it in the new library. That stuff's mostly done. But it is a very, very active, completely demolished. But the plan was, and, because you gave us permission to start early, was to get all of that dirt and noise and those things complete before they come back so that we can start actually putting this thing back together. So
Yeah.
Once Labor Day gets here, we'll be in that mode of reconstruction.
Yeah, and it looks scary from the photo that, oh my goodness, how are you going to finish this before the end of December? But once it gets enclosed, those finishes happen really fast, so it'll really start to shape up. We can show you some of those photos as we go along.
Good.
And the little theater is
Temporary.
is the
Temporary library.
Okay.
So, yeah, my main question was about the library. I know it's really important to a lot of students. And so you guys are on track, right? Because I know like a lot of my friends too are really counting on having that library like done by December so they can go back to like having a quiet place to work. So I just wanted to ask like how much on track
As of August 28th, 2018,
Yeah.
we're on track.
Okay.
But I can't say what's going to be as of September 1st,
Yeah.
2018.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying it because
Right, 'cause
construction
it
is
can
such,
change
and the
on
plan
the
is
dime.
to be on track with December. For a second semester, we'll be up and running. That's the plan.
And we're doing an educated guess. I mean, the reason for doing all the things we did this summer was to expose those big items that really, you hear about projects running over, change orders and delays, and those are usually discovered when you're ripping things apart. You find a column that you didn't know was there. Now you got a structural issue. or you find a wall you thought you could take out and it's actually a bearing one, you can't take it out, so you got to redesign. So all of those things are complete. We found all of our issues, and there's always some, but nothing there that wasn't like, we can deal with that. Reconfigure a little here and there. So, some plumbing wasn't where it was supposed to be when we cut up the floor, we had to move it. In your library now, you're almost 4 feet below the floor in the hallways. Well, we have sinks going in there, but the plumbing that we were supposed to tie into is above the sink. So gravity being gravity, that water's not going to go there. So we have to rethink how that is, because when they put those bathrooms in that are right backed up to it on the south side.
I think you're giving them way more information than.
I get it.
But I'm just saying, you find all the problems now, and then you figure it out.
Okay.
So that's where we're at.
And you also have a little theater, so for quiet space. I know it's not the same as a library, but at least you'll have that space so the kids can get there for a little
Okay,
while.
I just wanted to know where we were now, so thank you.
So, thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming, Augie. Thank you. I know you're probably sleeping here tonight or something.
Probably.
So more to come, and the board, there was a brief update I shared in front of the bulletin. As we go along, you constantly get information, but I thought it would be just good to know that things will be tight going into opening the school, but I think we've been there many times over. We don't like being there, but it's a reality of what you're doing construction. So we know that as we move forward. And just I'm surprised she's not here. She's probably in one of the buildings. And so we've heard from Augie and his folks have been doing tremendous work, and Cal's folks have been doing tremendous work. I think I'd be absolutely remiss if and I typically try not to highlight just a single person, but if you ever see Barb Saliker, please give her a hug. Because she is running on her guys so hard. She's the director of operations. So hard with her folks to make sure that as soon as the contractors via Augie give us access to a space, they're in there. And that's a key part of the success of this program. They can construct it, but they have to get it ready for school. So I say that because Barb has been a tremendous benefit to us since she's been back as an interim, and it really shows on this project piece now. So and she's here all the time. So again, kudos to Augie and folks there. Certainly I want to give kudos to Barb and to Clyde on the other side of the facilities piece. But I'll just give you an example. I walked to the high school today, and people were scrambling as soon as they see Barb coming, because the bottom line, every minute means that you're not doing something, it's a minute lost. And we only have a finite amount of time, so a lot of good things happen to make it happen. So thank you all. Thank you, appreciate it. I didn't put that link up here, but I just wanted to mention the board presentation schedules that we have it, and one of the things I try to do is look at our goals and look at our this and say, okay, how do we make sure that as we have presentations coming back to the board, we're addressing the board goals, the goals as well as the board's recommendations to me via evaluation, which many of those things were incorporated into the goals document anyway. So I just wanted to point that out. You should get, every time there's an update, a message on your Shen's school address to say there's an update. If it's not happening, it's my fault, not yours probably. I just have to make sure that I'm sharing it in the right way, that you get the update each time to say that there's an update to this document. So again, this is our resource document, internal resource document. It's a great document for the board because it kind of gives you a feel of when things are happening and when you hear more about things. And so when topics come up, you can't say, oh, I don't know. Well, you kind of have some sense that, yeah, that's something we have to talk about in that month versus this month. And typically there's a reason why. Lead time needed, timing of different things of that nature. So I just wanted to share that with you this week.
It's a very helpful document. And even though things change, whether we get to a meeting, we can't decide on something, it generally still follows that all the way through to the end of the year. And I found myself going through it several times to just say, okay, what's next? Because first year, everything's new. And even now, I just can't wait to look at it, see what's next.
Good. So I just want to share that piece of it. As Kathy comes forward, this is also the time of the year where which one you first, Kathy, the narrative or the summary?
Probably the narrative, but look at
So I just want to preface with just one comment before Kathy starts sharing some of the details. We got information to you today, we know that, and it's not an action item, it's an information item, and certainly if there are questions you have after this, shoot questions, so we try to provide further clarification. But the reason why we go through this process, in a pretty extensive process, is that predictability. We want to be able to forecast out 3-4 years out and understand our financial position as a system. And I think it's important for you as a board to understand our financial position as a system. Because what we don't want is in any given budget year, we're kind of like, oh my God, are we going to be in good place, bad place, or this place? Versus it's a degree of goodness. We're going to be, are we going to be really good? Okay, but hopefully never in that we're in a oh my God type place. I say that because I think it's important. So when you think about this, while it comes out in the report and data points, there's a lot of work by a lot of people within the system. So every decision that we make or every conversation we have within the system has an impact, has a financial impact. So that's just a backdrop. And so sometimes you hear people who don't understand the larger context of why certain things are happening. It creates opportunities. And so we look at the financial situation as opportunities. For things that we do one year impacts the next year, subsequent what we're doing this year is going to impact the year to come. So it's always this multi-year type of interchange, if you will, that's taking place with the budget process. And so you hear Kathy talk about some things. You're going to define some terms in a minute here. But I think that context is important for you as a board member to know that our objective is to have the district in a place from a fiscal perspective that we can look out 3 to 5 years and say, you know what, barring some major catastrophe, we should be in a good place to continue providing quality programs and, quite frankly, to continue to enhance programs for our students. So that's the backdrop to the message, the takeaway, if you will. If you don't take anything away from it, take away that piece of it, and the data proves that point out. So that's the other side of it. So just don't take the word, but look at the facts that proves that point out over and over again. So.
Okay. So as we look at the summary, a couple of
Kind
key
of hard
points.
to see.
I know. A couple of key points. One is on the expenditure side of the budget, we expended just over 98% of our budget, which, as you know, our goal is to not spend 100%. So to the extent that we can save money in one area, it means we can expend in priority areas elsewhere in the budget. On the revenue side, we received just over 100% of our budget, although not necessarily in the categories we expected. And in total, we ended up operationally with a surplus of about $4.5 million, and we were able to pay down the buses so that we didn't have to borrow this year for what the voters passed in May. We were able to pay for those buses straight out as opposed to borrowing. We were able to contribute to some reserves, and we also contributed or had enough for the reappropriation for next year's budget, as we always plan to do. So the first three areas you can see relate to salaries. And before we look at the details, I wanted to mention that we do have about 1,800 bodies or people between active employees and substitutes. So when you start looking at some of the numbers of retirements, resignations, and leaves of absence, while they may look like large numbers, we have a lot of people here. So I tried to, in each category, talk about the savings of the adjusted budget versus the savings or over expenditure of the adopted budget. So just to clarify the distinction between the two, the adopted budget is what we put together initially. When you think about it, we're putting it together at least 6 months, if not more, prior to the start of the budget year, and it's a plan. During the year, we will have budget adjustments. We have carryover encumbrances from the prior year, and those are orders that have been placed before the end of the year that we haven't received till the next year. So we have those adjustments, and we also have reappropriations that we might do during the year. And in this case, we had a tax tertiary reserve that we reappropriated in June. And we also, at the last board meeting, reappropriated for the capital reserve for use in the capital projects. So that's the distinction when you see a difference between adjusted budget and adopted budget, just to clarify. So on the instructional side, again, you'll see 14 retirements, 13 resignations, 55 leaves of absence. I might also mention, as we've seen routinely in the past, not unusual to have 40 maternity leaves in any given year. So without even looking at the detail, I can guarantee you a lot of the leaves of absences have to do with a lot of babies being born in the district. On the administrative side, not a lot of differences from what we projected. We did have one mid-year resignation with one person with a leave of absence where we ended up with a substitute to assist there. On the non-instructional side, it's a little bit of a different story. In particular, well, let me start out with saying we had 31 retirements, 29 resignations, and 91 leaves of absence for 6 disability workers' comp and other reasons. That sounds like a big number, but leaves of absence can be paid, unpaid. They can be, for short duration, long duration. So just a lot of activity going on there. But a lot of the differences between the adjusted budget and adopted budget, or should I say, for the over expenditure in this area, is because of transportation this year. We ended up having a lot of additional resources needed because we've added additional 49 students for homeless. May not be for the entire year, but at different points in the year, sometimes concurrently, sometimes not. And those may not be anywhere near Shenendehowa. In fact, some of them.
Often we're busing out of district.
Correct. Special needs had also required that we add additional bus runs. We added 5 this year with bus aids. We had some overloaded buses with a lot of people moving into the district with a lot of new construction going on, and we added an additional 5 bus runs there. And we also added 3 buses for some disciplinary issues that, while we tried a number of methodologies, that seemed to be the best way to address some of those issues.
No.
No, not necessarily, but might not be a bad idea. I don't know. And of course, we're always dealing with the bus driver shortage. We hear about that all of the time, but that results in a lot of overtime with both bus drivers and attendants.
So, quick question, because it's not just a Shen issue. I know across all the districts, it's a shortage of bus drivers. What's the cause?
But one,
Nobody wants to drive a bus.
well, it's not even, it's multiple things. To become a bus driver and the DOT regulations, it's not like you go out and go to the DMV, get your driver's license, you could drive tomorrow. There's pretty extensive months.
Yeah.
So you can have someone come in today and express an interest, and we probably won't have that person, if that person follows the step, but 2-3 months down the road before they can drive. And so now if you have someone who's looking for a job, it's great to say, yeah, we'll hold on to you, but we can't actually use you until you go through all these things. People find other employment elsewhere. So that's a big part of the hang up, and until some of that changes, now the trucking industry is dealing with the same thing. They have a shortage of truck drivers because similar requirements, and so you're starting to see this kind of ripple effect taking place. And so you have that. So it's a shortage on one side, but as Kathy pointed out, it's also an increased demand on the other side. So we have more specialized busing situations than any time before. And I say that because everyone wants an exception. And we always like, no, and no, because reality of it is we can't deal with the regular routine stuff consistent in some cases, much less the exceptions. And exceptions come from not only people, personal preferences, the exceptions come from, like the 49 kids that we're driving the kid someplace in Rensselaer County, some weird place that I've never heard of before, for example. And all of a sudden, so that's one person driving one kid, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, versus if we had that one person driving 60 kids. So those are the factors that comes into play, that there's a shortage on one side, but increased demand. And unfortunately, I think the demand is going to get worse before it gets better, especially since we don't live in a walking community, or quite frankly, we don't have a walking mentality in this community. So let's call a spade, because people could actually walk a lot of places, but people don't, and we have over time, as a system, designed our system to transport non-eligible, non-aid eligible kids. We transport a lot of kids that are not eligible for transportation aid because they live so close to this district, but we pick them up anyway because, you know, so a kid who lives off Clifton Park Center Road and goes to elementary school on campus, we pick up kids off Clifton Park Center Road because why not? We're driving by there, we pick them up, and that becomes a part of our route. And so if you were to say we want to cut costs, well, we just don't pick those kids up because there's one or two less bus. But that's not the model that has been here, and so sustaining the model is also very costly. But kudos to Trans, they do a lot of other things to curb costs, GPS, efficiencies in mechanics, all those kind of things to control costs as much as you can. It's just a demanding field right now.
So the 5 additional runs, bus runs, not the disciplinary ones, but
Specialized
are
programs.
these full buses?
No,
You know,
typically specialized programs.
Special needs buses?
Yeah. So a lot of, it depends. It depends.
Okay.
Sometimes we have big buses, sometimes we have little buses. Sometimes it's kind of like what's available at that time. You know, sometimes somebody piggyback and I drop off my run off a big bus, and I'm going to piggyback and take a kid someplace else.
Are you asking if they're
The size of the buses.
More kids, and
like if
so...
they're wheelchair-specific buses? things
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that?
well, what type of bus runs are these exactly?
They're
So are
typically
they-
a small number of kids going to very specialized programs.
Okay.
And we have tons of runs outside of the district.
So it's outside the district.
Yeah.
For programs outside the district.
So bus run may not be a full, a long yellow school bus. It could be a special.
It's a little one.
Yeah.
It's called a bus run.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Not the vehicle itself, but
Got it,
Right.
okay.
Okay, so moving on to benefits, obviously driven a lot by the salaries budget as well, but we had quite a large savings in health insurance, and that's mainly, well, there's a few different reasons. One is, if you remember, in January, we switched our prescription program to the consortium program through BOCES. And not only are there good discounts, there's an accountability structure built in where they audit the PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers, to make sure that they're giving us the discounts we need. They help craft the contracts to ensure that there's fewer loopholes that they can make money on. So there's a lot of factors built into that, which results in a lot of savings. So while we budgeted anywhere between 7 and 11% for each of the carriers, we actually saw a decrease in our prescription rates this year of 13.84%. Empire, we ended up switching from Matrix to the PPO. Not a huge reduction at 7.98% reduction in rates, but still a reduction. Prescription rebates average around $400,000 a year, so we're seeing that. CDPHP, because of our better experience or good experience, only increased about 4.69%. So in average, our expenditures or our average decrease in a projected cost for this next year is a little less than 1%, or it's a little less than minus 1%. So, and in addition to the fact we had one bargaining unit that increased their contribution rates by 1%. So all those factors leading to a pretty decent health insurance savings this year, which, by the way, helped us to purchase the buses.
so for Kathy, move off that, again, context for the board. We about $27 million in health insurance we spending?
I think it's about 24.
About $24 million in health insurance. So context becomes important, right? So when we look at that number, it's a huge, when look at health insurance as a category by itself, recognize many things that goes in it. We didn't look at that category and say, okay, if we're going to try to contain costs within the cost footprint, what are those big chunk categories we try to, whatever we can control, and that's why negotiation conversations become important. That's why it's also a conversation with our broker with our insurance companies become important. So all those things come together. So if we can contain costs by 5-6%, that's a couple $1 million. So all of a sudden, so we're not saying, oh, we want to cut costs by 50%. We're thinking we want to try to control costs by 5 or 6%, assuming that rates might be going up. And so if we can do that and have a net zero impact, that's what we're trying to get to. And we've been fortunate this year. So now position us to, okay, if health insurance starts spiraling up again, at least we're on the lower end of the spiral up moving forward. So I kind of share that context with you as a board, because when you look at the pure dollars, the $2.7 million, well, that's a lot. But remember, it's this huge pool of money that we're just trying to squeeze around the edges. Squeeze around the edges enough, and all of a sudden that creates some capacity for us to do some other things. And the benefit side, the other side of the benefit, I'm sure Kathy will talk about, because there are other benefit pieces. But the health insurance piece is one that we watch. And kudos to Kathy and her folks, and sitting with the brokers and really just analyzing option, and also then providing fair options to our employees. Because at the end of the day, we're employees too. So we're not going to say that we're going to have a lousy health insurance package. No, it's fair, back to the conversation we had before, a fair and reasonable package to our employees that doesn't have a huge financial cost impact.
Dental insurance, we have 2 plans. We have the CSEA Dental, which goes through CSEA just for that group, and Delta Dental, which is a self-funded plan for the rest of the employees. We had about $119,000 savings from Delta Dental. CSEA was a little bit overexpended, 14,000 or so. The other costs between employees' retirement system and teachers' retirement system, as well as Social Security, they're a factor of salaries. So if we have savings on the salary side, it goes to reason we'll have savings in these areas too. Employees' retirement system is a little different from teachers' retirement in that there's a variety of rates for the employees depending on what year they joined and what kind of plan, whether they're borrowing from the plan, et cetera, those kinds of things. So different from the teachers' retirement because that's all one rate. So a little more direct correlation with salaries on teachers' retirement. Social Security, we had some savings, and we also had some savings in the workers' compensation costs. We did change to a new carrier a year ago or so. We think they're doing a pretty good job for us, and I also think there's a lot more awareness in the district to create safer environments and try to help reduce workers' comp claims in general. Equipment, we're pretty much right on the money there, fully expended as planned. Contractual services, we did have some savings there as well, mainly in the utilities, about $700,000 when you take a look at electricity, natural gas, and water and sewer. Special education had some savings in their contractual line, mostly out of district tuition and services, although you'll see on the other side, we way increased BOCES, so that was kind of an offset there. We had some savings in liability insurance. I attribute that to the RFP we did last year for that area. We're kind of still riding that wave of savings. And fiscal agent fees, because we did less borrowing, including on the buses, we had some savings there. Textbook and library books, we did have some savings there. We did, however, maximize our aid because aid can be shared among not only textbook and library books, but also with software and hardware. So that just is a reallocation to maximize some aid there. BOCES costs, we just talked a little bit about that. Special education placements was actually $551,000 overexpended. As you can see, that's a direct offset from the private placements that we had in the previous section of the budget. And BOCES IMS was overexpended, but again, that was really utilizing some savings from some other budget lines. Supplies, we had some savings there, and again, I attribute a lot of that to some of the bids and making sure that we're taking advantage of state contract pricing, use of central warehouse, not huge amounts of savings in the building budgets, as you can see, but the big item there was transportation savings, and that's the fuel line repair parts and supplies there. Transfers to other funds. Transfer to special aid fund, we were over by about $57,000 there. And if you remember, this line item is the 20% district share of the summer special education program. So even though it's $57,000 over budget, next year we'll be getting back some of that money as a result of the aid, summer school education aid. Transferred capital fund, this is where we utilized a lot of our savings. We had about a $4 million, we overexpended by $4 million by utilizing the savings in other budget lines. $2.4 million was used to eliminate the amount we borrowed for buses that was just passed, as well as a little bit that was left over from the prior year buses. We had a mid-year purchase that we didn't do right at the end of last year. We also had some bullet aid from the prior year of $65,000 that we were transferring over, and of course the $1.5 million of that reappropriated fund balance that we moved over to the capital fund from the capital reserve. So, so a lot of where we use some of our excess funds were in the capital area. Looking on the revenue side, just over 100%. I won't go into all of these in detail necessarily. Real property taxes, pretty much right on the money. State aid, we had some excess, mostly from transportation and BOCES aid. Interest income, just always a sad story that it's so low. We only had $17,000 this year that we earned. Federal revenue, we had $10,000 shortfall. The item I wanted to point out here is that we did receive some FEMA aid from a year ago, March, when we had those 2 emergency snow days where they closed down all the roads, so we did get $34,000 back from that. Other revenue items, a lot of smaller ones, but the big item here, why we were in excess of $900,000 is because we had the land sale of $1.1 million, and that went into the other revenue line item. The rest of them were mostly shortfalls that offset that a little bit, but that contributed to our revenue. So in the grand scheme of things, when we look at our fund balance, as I said, our expenditures were at 98%, our revenues were just over 100%, and our operational surplus was about $4.5 million. Of that, we appropriated $1.5 million to next year's budget, because when we put together our budget this last year, we said we were going to contribute that to offset taxes. Workers' comp reserve, we actually reduced our reserve by $578,000. We had been reserving both the short-term and long-term portion. We saw some guidance this year that directed or gave us guidance that we really should only be reserving the long-term portion, so we reduced that reserve to be in compliance with the expectation. Our tax certiorari reserve, we did reappropriate $90,000 there, but we received a ton of tax certiorari claims this year. Again, this summer, July and August tend to be when we get those. We are well reserved for everything that we have, and we also have Dave Rowley working on a lot of those tax certiorari cases that that are more sizable, we'll say, some of the larger property owners in the area. Our retirement contribution reserve of increasing by $750 offsets what we used for the budget this year. The employee benefit accrued liability reserve, we decreased about $700,000 because, again, we saw some guidance this year that indicated we should not be including payroll taxes, so we reduced that to be in compliance with just the actual liability for benefits. And then the capital reserve, as we mentioned, we're utilizing $1.5 million for the capital projects that was voted December 2017 for this next set of capital projects next summer. We added the $1.1 million from the land sale, so that will sit in the capital reserve until we actually purchase land. That was our intent there. And on top of that, we were able to contribute another $1.6 million of surplus to the capital fund for future projects. So in the end, I think we're in a good place. Managed a lot of those areas as a district very well. But obviously, when you've got the tax cap and a lot of factors that we really don't have control over, like health insurance and retirement costs, we want to keep a close handle on those things so that we, in future years, can plan with some confidence that we're going to still remain in fiscal health.
Any questions, thoughts, comments?
Great job, Kathy.
Great
job to you and your team. Thank you.
So a lot of work goes into the whole thing. To shift gears a little bit and something a little bit as critically important, but probably a little bit more lighthearted. You get to see Dr. Wood at her. She rendezvous as a should I say, not rendezvous. What's the thing that people moonlight as a ad actress. And so one of the things that we've been working on, and Gary joined us this summer in Ithaca, and Elizabeth and I made a presentation, and we were just, quite frankly, shocked by how many school districts across the state don't have any type of training for people who are hiring people. And certainly don't have training related to addressing bias in hiring practices. And this video is probably, Elizabeth probably shared out easily a dozen school districts already, and they don't even want to change it. They just want to use ours and say, can we just use yours as a part of our training? Has Shen all over it. So we thought it might be a neat thing for you as a board to see, because hopefully the speakers are on.
Are we getting any royalties on those?
Yeah.
Not really. Do we get proceeds?
Let me see it in this book.
Thank you for your willingness to serve on a hiring committee in Shenendehowa. Your work and time is valued, therefore it's important that we spend some time outlining quality hiring practices. So for the next few minutes, as you watch this training video, I ask that you pay particular attention to the role of bias in hiring, knowing that schools that have the most diverse teams are positioned to provide the best outcomes for students. The role of interview teams in Shenendehowa is to narrow the field of applicants looking for diverse, highly qualified candidates who reflect a multicultural profile and demonstrate a commitment to excellence. Finding the best is a multi-step process starting with administrators pre-screening candidates, usually identifying 8 to 10 for each position. As a member of a stakeholder committee, you will provide feedback to your administrator who is charged with selecting the top candidates to move forward. For all teaching positions, top candidates will be invited to teach a demonstration lesson, followed by a final round district-level interview. Being aware of our biases as we meet with candidates is essential if we truly want to identify the best to move forward. Bias is a natural part of being human. Our biases help us organize the complex world around us. We all favor certain characteristics in others for a wide variety of reasons. While there are many forms of bias to be aware of, the purpose of this video is to raise awareness about the forms of bias that are most likely to impact the interview process. The first bias is to explore our positive biases towards certain candidates, which may impact our ability to examine all candidates objectively. These positive biases include thinking favorably about someone we already know, or someone who has a similar background as we do. Positive bias can also include leaning toward candidates who we believe will fit in with the group and not disrupt the status quo. All of these biases, however seemingly well-intentioned, are not aligned with fair or equitable hiring practices, nor do they support our goal of finding the best candidate. These biases actually reduce the chances that other, potentially more qualified candidates are seriously considered for positions. We need to be be ready to identify candidates we don't know, who may not be like us at all, and may actually outperform us if we are serious about finding the best candidate for each position. One of the greatest challenges when controlling for bias is that many of our biases are developed over our lifetime and affect our thinking below the surface of our conscious thought. This is known as implicit bias. Unfortunately, implicit bias is hard to curb as it is not easily seen through introspection and doesn't always align with what we think we believe. Implicit bias may lead us to say we value and support diversity, but then influence us at a deeper level by rating candidates who are like us or candidates we know higher than other candidates with greater potential or qualifications. Another form of bias that can seep into hiring is confirmation bias, which may make us listen for information that confirms what we already believed or thought about a candidate. Our brain often begins passing judgment the minute we see someone. When we meet a candidate who in our mind looks the part, or we already know the candidate, we may be more inclined to listen to responses from a positive lens. The converse also holds true. When we perceive a candidate doesn't fit the traditional mold, or they are different from us, we may be more inclined to listen for weak answers, therefore minimizing the candidate entirely. Controlling for confirmation bias requires giving every candidate our full, impartial attention, listening to all of what they say rather than selected parts. Controlling for bias also means that we overtly celebrate differences. Attempting to be colorblind or ignore what makes candidates different has actually been shown to increase the role of implicit bias within hiring. This is because our brains naturally see differences, while colorblind thinking attempts to exclude obvious sources of information. A good hiring process embraces and celebrates what makes candidates different. This in turn increases the likelihood of finding the best candidate, while also helping to ensure all students have the opportunity to learn from diverse staff and interact with a variety of cultural backgrounds. Celebrating differences also means we operate in full accordance with the law, ensuring candidates are not excluded for any protected class, personal characteristics such as real or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, pregnancy, age, disability, and many other important factors. The good news is, we can work to reduce the impact of bias in the hiring process simply by being more aware of our own thinking. We can also be sure to measure all candidates using consistent, objective criteria, recording what candidates actually say, rather than our own translation of what we think they say. Outlining specific strengths and potential areas for growth in writing for each candidate is also important, avoiding vague or problematic phrases such as might not be a good fit, which can be used to conceal biases and sort out people who are not like us. Hiring the best does not happen by chance, but it really is a result of a very careful process. It requires all of us to check our biases and assertively look to hire the best candidate for every open position. Thank you very much for your willingness to serve on a committee. Our students and families are counting on all of us to get this right.
So we use this for all our hiring teams, and it's important because I think we end up with a consistent quality product, if you want to look at it that way, at the end of it. And I think it also sends a message in terms of what we're about as a system, as a school, as a community, in terms of we want to have a wide variety of quality people interacting with a wide variety of students that we serve.
I don't know if you can totally say that. You don't have to answer this, but it mentioned that we often look at objective criteria as one of the bullet points that was at the end of the video. What are some examples of objective criteria?
Like credentials, like what certifications you may have, things of that nature.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's pretty neat. And as I said, I was surprised how far ahead of the curve we were. Here we are thinking that this is everyone is doing this.
Right.
And shocked actually how many people are not doing it. So it's good. But again, I thought it would be good for you as a board because there are a lot of things that we do that we take for granted. I think Gary saw the video and suggested this would be a good thing for the board to be aware of because this happens all the time. In fact, we just updated this. This is a recent one this year. So yeah. Thank you. Just want to share that. The NYSBA resolution, there was a link they all should have, and I'll turn it over to Gary because the booklet is in there, and we had 2 resolutions that we offered. One was accepted, modified somewhat. Gary just informed me that. The second
Because
one,
we just watched the video, I think it's appropriate to deal with
Yeah.
that particular resolution first. The feedback we got for the resolution essentially said that they didn't want something that was going to constitute a mandate, another mandate. And I think we have to make sure that we make the point that not all mandates are equal. That, while we may take exception to the intrusion into our freedom to exercise local control and costs being imposed on us that are not supported by the state and so forth, and we can understand it readily, there are things that really ought to be done. And I would say at this particular point in time, the operation of those unintended biases, implicit and explicit biases and so forth, operate in our classrooms as well as in our hiring practices, and they may just as easily affect some of the things that boards do. And it's very, oftentimes I think it's people who are most adamantly opposed to the idea that this could possibly be affecting them that need the training the most. Consequently, I think that this is what we need to express to the people who rejected the approval of or endorsement. I shouldn't say they have no power to approve or reject. They did not endorse the resolution. I think we have to point out those 2 things in particular, that there really is a need, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in an urban area where they're more likely to be a diverse population, but any school district, because we all benefit from a more diverse population. All of our students benefit when we have a more diverse workforce. And the training starts perhaps at the top, administration and for us, but ultimately it has to be something that goes down through the entire workforce, not just the classroom teachers, but everybody that has contact with students throughout the day. So I'm hoping we're going to turn this around. It's a little bit of an uphill battle, but that's that.
Did they propose changes?
So what 2 things, and I'm going to ask Gary if he could contribute to share some of his sentiments shared here as a part of a rebuttal statement. So we're going to amend the piece a little bit because it's kind of like a multi-pronged piece. So NYSBA is a one, then NISCUS, our association, we're working on angle. We also then pushing SANES, which is the Association for Administrators, as an angle. NYSBA is still right now the probably more difficult one to get into, but we will, because we just happen, they're just so preoccupied with the recent Janus ruling piece that it's not that they're objecting, it's just that, quite frankly, all their resources going to preserving their membership. So I say that with it being a multi-pronged effort, my objective, I'm going to use this my own personal, not necessarily because I want to say Gary, that is, if we can get NYSBA as an organization, because NYSBA also has association with all those organizations, to say, one, yeah, we're going to help push, collaborate with all these organizations as well. That's one piece of it. And also, 2, for NYSBA as a part of their training sequence, to put it out there as training options for board members. Right now, it's not. And so I kind of look at, yeah, I know where we ultimately want to get. However, if we start getting that as a part of the option and more organizations start talking about it, I mean, that becomes a big piece of it because, again, going back to this summer, we had 400 plus people from across the state, I think represented about 60 plus different school districts. But that's a small smidget when you think about it. We have 706, 708 maybe. So good percentage still, but we have a lot of school districts. And you have a lot of school districts and quite frankly, your school boards who don't have these conversations, don't want to have these conversations, and yet you have schools that are, quite frankly, your kids aren't necessarily being supported in ways that it should be effectively be supported. And so call it a mission, if you will. So part of the mission is, and thanks to Gary for helping to craft that, and thank you as a board, is to say, okay, we'll get NYSBA off the dime off this, and we're doing a presentation down, Elizabeth and I and several other people. NYSBA has created a whole section of they shift the conference for this purpose, and what we're hoping to do is that, if we get into the mind's eye of board members themselves, and already we see them. In fact, just today, I got like 4 or 5 different emails of people having these conversations out at their board table, which is what we want. Start having the conversation, start engaging your community in real conversations that's going to have real impact to come. And so we won't get to the finish line right away, nor do we expect to get to the finish line. But we want to start progressing to that finish line. And so that's why I want, and I'll share it, Gary, I'll share it electronically, the amendment, probably I can have a copy I can share with you. But the rebuttal piece of it becomes an important piece of it. So I'm going to ask if you could share some of those comments that we could send back with a rebuttal to say, yes, why are we making this amendment? Because their hang-up was requiring all. Because NYSBA technically can't require all boards to do it, and it becomes a legislative piece, and either they don't have the will or skill, I'm not sure which one. So they didn't want to say yes to something that they're not sure they could effectively do. However, not to prolong this, another prong to this too is the Board of Regents right now has a task force, and who knows, maybe October, November, the Board of Regents is going to put out what they call an equity index. They're looking at everything from piggybacking how the recent law or the governor's last budget, now we always have to report financially, equity moving forward, and for us it's going to be 2020, but we're going to do it early just so we can get used to the process. But they're going to look from equity index, from looking at student performance and asking the question, why do we have consistently Black and Hispanic kids in our system consistently lowest performers, regardless of their own personal economic situation? Why? Why do we have poor kids having to be in the least resource schools consistently? Why the kids aren't choosing to do that? So somewhere there's a policy, written or otherwise, biases, explicit or otherwise, that's reinforcing and allowing that to happen. And so until we call that out, kids aren't getting a fair share in terms of quality education. So it then comes down to, because some people want to split it along racial lines, but split against student lines. Every kid in our system should be afforded, not only, we can't say, well, we give them an opportunity, just not taking advantage of it. That's a cop-out. That's a cop-out we hear all the time. No, we offer all these classes. We did it here at Shen. 12, 13, 11 years ago, Don was here 10, so 10 years ago. We offer all these AP courses. And we had one Black kid in all our AP courses. And we say, why? Well, it's not taking it. Okay, so we need to find out why. And so we just can't stop there. By offer, access is not the only portion of it. And it's not a black and white thing. It's a poor thing. It's a this thing. It's a this thing. And each time one of these things happen, it erodes the credibility of what do we really stand for as an educational institution. Because you as a parent, you trust and hope that, people have your best interest in mind, and they're looking out for your best interest in mind and doing the things so you can, in fact, take advantage of the things that's your best interest in mind. So that's where the bigger conversation comes in at, and it starts to end with boards of education. We have some boards of education who represent certain voices in the communities who think that certain things we shouldn't care about because it's not impacting my kids. So why should we spend money on those things? There used to be the argument against special education. Why spend money on kids who we know they will never graduate from high school? Well, because they're somebody's kid. And you know what? And that's what we do. So I share that as a backdrop to say that that's why this time and these times are so critical that as a system, we are leading the charge, and this is just one of several things we hope to start changing, shifting the conversation within communities across the state. And so no longer can people look at things black and white.
So I have a question about the process then. For this one, does that mean they don't vote on it, or they
No,
do
they
vote
won't.
on it anyway, even though it's not endorsed?
So how the process would go, you have the draft book. So you submit amendments you can submit amendments without a rebuttal or with a rebuttal. We would like to do it with rebuttal because a rebuttal speaks to the significance of what we think this is. Then that amended one will go in the final book for the business meeting. The difference is the ones that had the initial endorsement don't need to have a first and second. However, I know I have probably 50 people across the state. So Gary, as Shen rep, would have to make the motion for this resolution, then it's seconded by someone else, and then it goes into, yeah, and then it goes into the voting process.
Okay. When people
So-
will speak.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
Okay.
so then the rebuttal will be printed. People get a chance to see why we thought, yes, we're making this change. And while we're making this change, we want to emphasize the importance of this particular resolution and why we think it's important, and those kind of things. And so that becomes a part of the book, the final book, so to speak. So that's why the timing becomes important, because they want to get all this stuff out. That's why they send this out now, so people start looking at it, and you start getting your ducks lined up with other districts that will stand up and speak on behalf of this particular resolution, or the amendment, therefore.
Can I add a couple things?
There was a second resolution that we put forth, and that did receive endorsement, and the only thing I would say about that was I actually misinformed the board unintentionally. The last time we met, I said that they were going forward with already moving in the direction of trying to do something to make sure that due process was ensured in the tenure hearing process, so forth, and that is not the case. That was my misunderstanding. I did indeed have a conversation with Julie Merlet. Julie talks a little fast sometimes. And our initial conversation led me to believe that this is what she was talking about, and actually lost track of what she was saying, and I jumped to a conclusion. No, they're not going forward until such time as this is actually passed. I thought that they had, I even spoke to Dr. Robinson's second miscue on my part. I thought they had kind of totally omitted the reference to due process, which was really the main thrust of making sure that process, the 3028 process, ensured due process. Because last year there was a resolution calling for that I felt jeopardized due process. They were talking about after the passage of a certain period of time while the process was going forward, if it was not concluded by whatever X number of months or whatever, that they would start taking the individual who is under investigation and the proceedings are against their pay away. And that, to me, they're punishing a person before they've actually completed the due process thing. I know that there's in other sectors they can do that, but this is the public sector, and we are committed to due process and so forth. And the reality is that the courts recognize a tenure as a property right, and therefore those things that are forthcoming as part of that property, such as your pay, shouldn't be arbitrarily removed simply on the basis of deadline. So it has been endorsed. I don't think it'll be a problem. We didn't directly challenge last year's motion, but I think it's fairly clear that would be superseded by this.
So some comments on the first item. I'm a little bit taken aback by the ruling because the message is no unfunded or lightly funded mandates. That's a fair and appropriate thing from NYSBA and our other lobbying organizations to say, don't throw things at us that aren't paid for. I think this doesn't cost a lot. We're in education, and education is done by educators, and it should be a natural thing for folks to review the video. This is not a very expensive mandate, so I think that point needs to be challenged. The other point is that this is a time for education to step up to the plate. We're in an environment where there's a lot of extreme views that just get stuck in the, quote, echo chambers out there that just fester and cause problems because nobody is willing to get in between and have conversations, whether it be at a board table, whether it be at community conversations. This is a way to bring it forward in a very professional way. And as you see from the video, it doesn't call out any group, it calls out everybody and says everybody has a bias. It's also very neutral in its tone and language. And I think that would be a good way to have different groups, ideally, to just start having conversations. First amongst themselves and going, why do we just talk amongst ourselves? Why don't we talk to other people? So, because we're not making any progress just talking amongst the very extreme groups by themselves.
You know, in terms of not being very costly, compare, for instance, the expenditures that are being made to overcome some of the unintentional, perhaps even intentional, handicaps that are imposed on various groups of people, even if it's only underfunding the appropriate programs. This, to me, addresses some of those underlying conditions that actually perpetuate and enhance the disadvantages. And to do it this way is extremely cost-effective and something we can deal with. We're talking about structural and cultural characteristics or actions that have been in place and continue to be in place, sometimes simply because people want to continue the advantage of one group over another. And we fail to recognize that oftentimes.
Point. So more to come. Gary, stay up late tonight, some of your rebuttal, will you? Action.
Okay, no study session items. Let's go to action items. First one is approval of revised tax warrant. Is there something you put on the screen, or is it?
Unless there's a question, I mean, you can't.
Can I have a motion?
Oh, gosh.
Todd, second. Naomi, any comments or questions on approved revised tax warrant? If not, all in favor? Second item, let's treat this one separately. That's a contract amendment, Saratoga Center for the Family. Can I have a motion on this one? Christina, second. Krista, any comments or questions?
I was really happy to see that it's expanding the way it is to
Yep.
the elementary schools, and although there was a reference even specifically identified Arenda, Carrigon, but it talked about even expanding further.
Spend it on,
So,
mhm.
yeah, so I like it. It's
I think it's a noticeable trend.
Yes.
Several years ago, we started to do a few things with Saratoga Center for the Family, bringing it to the high school, and every year we add more. And this year, we're bringing, I believe, a facility in High School West for our students there. So, I mean, it's a noticeable trend. We're bringing more emotional supports from this group to help our students of need out. So, all in favor? Okay. Third one, 3 contracts, one for special education tuition, Northeast Parent and Child, Parsons Child and Family Center, Rochester School for the Deaf. Could I have a motion on this one? Gary, second. Deanna?
I would like to ask a question and make a statement relative to that. Kathy, do you know what the current tuition for the Rochester Schools for the Deaf is?
It was.
76,000.
Yeah, 76,000.
76,000.
That's one student.
Years ago, when this first came to my attention, it was like $50,000. And I found out that unlike most special education, called special education program, this was not an expense that shifted from a school district to another school district when a child and family moved from one district to another. The referring school district owned it,
So,
okay?
Even if they move
even if they move.
out of the state?
No.
Well, no, no,
We're not going
this
that
is
far.
in connection with the Rochester school.
Okay.
And so,
Upstate,
if they
okay.
remain in the state, even though they move to a new district, you still have to pay whatever the tuition is. And so I felt this was very unjust. We had a resolution that was passed at one point in time that called for the state, or, well, first to shift the burden from one school district to the receiving school district, which seems appropriate. But because of the fact that Rochester's adjacent school districts oftentimes became the home of the parents of the child, so that they would be in
overburdened.
closer proximity with them,
Okay.
they, of course, didn't want to have to assume all of these numbers of kids. I fully understand that. So we reintroduced that particular resolution at another time, calling for the state to assume the responsibility for the payment of all students that were in this program. I think it wasn't a sunset, it was one of those renewed resolutions, but that represents probably a course of about 9 years and never went anyplace. It was endorsed by deputy commissioners from the state education department, and so forth. It still did not go anyplace. Justification is there. The rationale is there. Just couldn't get the critical mass.
So we have first and second.
So we had a vote.
Okay, second motion on this?
We did.
Okay, we already got the second. Okay, any more comments? If not, all in favor? Thank you. And the fourth action item, donation of a virtual reality lab from Global Foundries. Can I have a motion on this one? Todd, second Naomi. Any comments or questions with gratitude? Okay, all in
I'd like
favor?
to see this at some,
Yep. And we look forward to Dr. Robinson's invitation to look at this at some point.
yeah,
when
we're
it's
all
set
gonna
up.
go to the fridge on the first day of school, and we're gonna check it out.
I don't know, because I haven't seen it myself.
Oh, okay. I'm really
Yet
curious
here?
what it is.
I
Well, it's
mean,
in the fridge right now.
They started installing it this
Right,
week, so
they're
if it's,
Oh, they're installing it.
yeah, so.
And action item on personnel. Mrs. Bush, would like to speak to this?
Thank you for having us for staffing this evening.
Oh.
We are still in the midst of hiring. We have several bus transportation things are on here, so kind of to answer Mr. Gilbert's question too.
Thank you.
The bidding took place over 2 days and was very successful in the number of transportation folks we have. We have 3 retirements that I'd like to recognize. Carmela Lucier is a first grade teacher at Shattuck. She'll be retiring in December. Carolyn Dusha is retiring after 11 years as a teacher aide, and Barbara Jones is retiring after 31 years as a bus driver. So those are the 3 retirements in the district.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion on this one? Naomi, Christina, second. Any other comments or questions? If not, all in favor?
Thanks, Joe.
Okay. At this point, we're ready to adjourn. Dr. Robinson mentioned some key dates. Other dates are listed here. Next board meeting is September 11th. Subject to any other further comments or questions, I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Motion.
Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Second, Naomi. First, Naomi. Who's second? Second, Todd, second. All right. All in favor? Right, meeting adjourned.
You gotta give me a script.